Hello and welcome to Startup Stories with Scaleway, where we explore cutting-edge startups around the world and how they leverage cloud computing technologies. I'm your host, Ethan Pierce, and today's guests are Andreas Limke, CEO, and Jörg Dupfert, CTO at Meteor, where they create artificial intelligence-powered tools that automate analysis of MRI images. Welcome, Andreas and Jörg.
Thank you.
Hi.
Glad to be here.
It's really great to have you, and I enjoyed our kind of pre-recording conversation to kind of get to know a little bit about this subject and to dive in. It's fascinating what you're doing in kind of the radiology world, and so I would love to give just context to that by starting with a brief pitch of the basic idea of the problem that you are solving at Meteor.
Sure. So what we at Meteor are doing, we analyzing radiologic images like MRI images with our software, and we use their deep learning. And these deep learning algorithms provide the radiologists with additional information that it's very difficult for them to acquire or to really analyze from the image. And we give that in a very easy report, and they get it during their reading. And so in the end, also the diagnosis of the patient improves, and that's why we founded this company.
Yeah, when I was reading on the website, I liked one of the phrasings that I thought was very interesting was this provides kind of an immediate second opinion, so that if it's a complex diagnosis, it happens while the person is still in the office, but also it provides the radiologist with, they already have maybe their own idea, obviously from their training and being able to look at this and see what's going on, but this provides that second opinion. And I think that's really fascinating as we look at in health tech how artificial intelligence and all of these amazing tools that we have now and that are going to be coming in the decade to come, that a lot of it's not about replacing doctors. It's simply giving them better tools to be able to do even more, but at the same time also providing maybe a parallel path where for discovery where they can actually see things or think about things that they maybe had not seen. So not so much just about the doctor not being able to do it, but just really giving them even better and better diagnostic tools. I think that's a really cool thing to be doing with this kind of technology. So I'm interested always in the backstory of how these things come to be. Where'd the idea come from? As the founders, are there any interesting anecdotes or backstory here on why you created this company?
Sure. Maybe I'll start with that because the first idea of this company actually didn't came from both of us. It came from a customer. So I was the CTO of my former company called HQ Imaging. And there we did a lot of consulting, and I also visited radiologists and did some sequence optimization, doesn't matter what it is, workflow optimization. And then I asked them like the typical question, is there anything else I can do for you? And they actually said, yes, you're a physicist, so can't you provide to us an automatic program that analyzes these brain MRI images and measures their volume? And I said, okay, if you're willing to pay for that, I can provide a prototype. And 6 months later, they really were happy about a very, very simple spreadsheet. And Jörg is still laughing at me because I did it on my own at that time. So that's how Meteor was founded as an initial idea. And then I realized after they used the prototype and were really happy about that, paid for it, I said, okay, that has to be performed and initiated in a different setup with professional software developers. And then Jörg was the right person because I knew him up front. Yeah.
That's great. And obviously, Jörg, if you have anything you want to jump in on these answers, feel free to jump in as well. It's a conversation between both of you. So I don't know if you have a story about how this came to be, or maybe being the CTO to a CTO founder. That's always fun. If there's anything you want to add in.
Yeah, maybe where did we get to know each other? So we know each other for a long time already. So we both studied MRI physics at the University of Heidelberg, and back then Andreas was my supervisor. He was doing his PhD, I was doing my diploma. And we were both like really interested into MRI physics, and I was especially interested in the software side of things. And but then I went, doesn't matter. I went to a different university than him and to a different company, and was more into the machine learning side of things. And then Andreas, as he just told us, had this idea of founding a company, and then he really remembered, there was this guy who was good at software and could also do some MRI. And then he like told me, Jörg, do you want to combine MRI and artificial intelligence? And I was like, yeah, it's nice, but I have this safe job and it's quite cool. And he kept on like nagging me over and over. And at some point I said, oh yeah, okay, let's do it. And yeah, and now I'm really happy that I did it in the end and took the risk of founding a startup. And yeah.
Oh, bravo! That's really great. I've been in France and Europe for a while now, and the discussion around that safety of job has always been an interesting one in innovation, because it uh, uh, having a solid opportunity to work in a good thing that's safe is definitely something that has been hard to overcome for entrepreneurs that want to dive into something and potentially take a risk on whether it could work. So bravo that you guys have built something really cool, that you've got the product market fit, you've got these clients that are super happy. That's a great story. It's exciting to hear that things are going well. And so obviously this is a high technology company. This is not a little bit of technology. This is, the fact that you're both physicists is that's always fun. Whenever we get into talking about what companies are doing, sometimes it can be more about the problem solving than it is about the technology. Here, it sounds like this is very technology driven. So I'd like to know a little bit more about the stack kind of that you're using. How are you taking these images and creating this diagnostic kind of opinion, second opinion that is useful to radiologists?
Maybe I'll take that question. So the basis of all that we are doing is, as Andreas mentioned, is deep learning, so neural networks. I think that's basically the basic technology of about most of the artificial intelligence startup that are founded today. But that's not the only thing we're doing, because we're dealing with this medical data, which is very special. It needs a lot of pre-processing. It is 3D in nature, so it's not like 2D images as most of the cases from cameras. It's a 3D image stack. So we have to basically adapt these existing technologies to our needs. Maybe for the ones that know a bit more about deep learning, we're using so-called UNets for our predictions. And what we're in fact doing is we are segmenting regions out of the radiologic images. So for example, if you have a brain image, then maybe you're interested in the hippocampus. So what we're doing is we segment this hippocampus out of the image. So that's really what our deep learning algorithm is in the end doing. And then on top of these segmentations, we then do a lot of other things that provide really diagnostic value to the customer. For example, let's say we have now segmented this region in the brain, this hippocampus, then we can measure its volume, right? But now we don't know if that's like a volume that is normal, or maybe it's a too low volume and the hippocampus is too small, and that indicates maybe Alzheimer's or something else. So we also then compare this measured volume that we have with a huge collective of healthy patients, where we get then basically a range of volumes of this hippocampus, what is normal, and then we look on this individual measurement that we just did with the patient that's currently in the scanner, and we see, okay, where does it fall within this normal range? And if it's very far outside, we say, okay, hey, here's something, and we highlight that in the report to really provide the diagnostic value. And maybe in terms of technology stack, so if there are some developers outside that want to apply here, so we're using mainly PyTorch for development, and we use MLflow for monitoring our experiments, and GitLab CI for continuous integration.
So I'm curious then, again, coming from this without understanding all the detail of the radiology side of this, I'm curious the detail, you're mentioning this volumetric analysis and things like that, compared to the naked eye of a radiologist who is well-trained and very well experienced. So we're not replacing the fact that they're a great doctor, but what are we talking about in terms of detail that your algorithms are able to potentially find things that maybe the radiologist would like to know, but maybe they don't see because the detail is that subtle?
Maybe I take that question. So what you correctly mentioned is a radiologist has a huge experience in analyzing these images with his eyes, but that's all. He has not the time in a daily routine. He has just 3 seconds per image, so meaning in total 10 minutes maybe per reading time for a patient to create such a diagnostic report. And then you could really think about that he has not the time to do exact volumetric quantifications. Like he cannot really analyze that in his daily routine. So what we then do, we help them. We give him this quantification. We give him this exact information, because in a daily routine, he could just look at it and compare and say, yes, this is usually smaller than a normal brain with 80 years that I've seen. But he doesn't have the time to do it as quantitative as we give him this information.
This maybe I can add up on that. So this quantitative thing is one part of it, which the radiologist usually doesn't do, as Andreas mentioned. Like, they don't really measure what's the volume of the hippocampus. They just look on with their eyes, and then they see, based on experience, they know if this is small or not. But that's not really quantitative. It's just eyeballing. And also different radiologists do it completely differently. So it's really dependent on the radiologist. And what I wanted to add up on is, in terms of accuracy, what we are aiming for, or what our product is at the moment, is at the level of the accuracy of the radiologist. So we usually do something that we have our own radiologists that are labeling the data for us. We are giving them data sets and they will label it. So maybe 4 or 5 radiologists. And then we compare how is the deviation of the radiologists among each other. And then we calculate also the deviation of our algorithm to those radiologists. And then if we are on the same level, then we know, okay, our algorithm is now ready to be released. Yes.
So when we look at, a lot of the times when we talk with more B2C type startups, the marketing and business development kind of targeting conversation, it has a lot of detail to it. I'm curious with you, besides just radiologists, who are you? Maybe in more detail, who are you targeting? Like, who would be interested in this solution specifically? Is it all radiologists? Is it a specific kind of radiologist? Is it a specific radiologist in a specific environment? What is the detail there that would be useful if somebody's, watching this and going, well, that's really fascinating. Would that potentially apply to our clinic or to our system?
That's a good question. So basically, we are targeting all radiologists with our first product, for example, brain MRIs. Also, normal hospitals are using brain MRIs, but together with private radiologic practices. So in principle, every radiologist who analyzes some MRI images is a potential customer of us and a potential user. But not just these people we are targeting. In the end, we are also interested in the patients who should be, or let's say, have a positive impact on such a diagnostic report. Because what Jörg just mentioned, when they not just get a diagnostic report from the radiologist, which is very difficult to read for them because it's full of medical words, but rather quantitative with nice images, and for example, in several measurements, how your volume decreases may be dependent on your behavior and about your disease, then it's something like the patient in the end can really have an advantage of.
Well, I think I'm then really interested in this idea that, so on the infrastructure side, so there's a lot of technology here. You mentioned kind of your technology stack, lots of the machine learning that's going on here. So I'd imagine that when we talk about this partnership with Scaleway and being a startup in the midst of this cloud computing infrastructure idea, that the infrastructure piece is important. But before we get to that, I'm also very interested in potentially the idea just of the GDPR kind of privacy by design compliance that might be important there. I saw on the website that your MD Brain product is a registered medical device in Europe. I would assume that brings lots of responsibility around how you treat the patient's data. I think I also read on the website that the data doesn't actually leave the office. The private data doesn't actually leave. So you're analyzing it without that data actually being exposed to the world. So maybe a little bit of detail about the privacy side of what you do. And then I'll come back and we'll talk about the infrastructure side.
Yeah, good point. And as you already read on the homepage, so we are offering our solution at the moment only on the premises of our clients. Exactly for that reason, because especially in Europe, the data protection is very important, not only by law but also from the clients, especially in Germany, I would say. So that's why our first decision was to build a product where the medical data of the patients never leaves actually their practice and is never exposed to the cloud. However, we are also seeing that it becomes more and more important to, especially when we talk about having maybe thousands of clients or clients that send really a lot of analysis, so that our local infrastructure is maybe not capable of dealing with that we also at some point have to move into the cloud. And we're currently we are starting to implement that, also looking at all the regulatory issues that brings with it. And one idea is to use, of course, a European cloud provider, which would alleviate many of the concerns we have when we put in data on the cloud.
Well, I think that's, I'll let you explain maybe what brought you to Scaleway in terms of the interest of being in the startup program and using Scaleway as an infrastructure provider. But there are definitely those three things that come up very often. One is the privacy by design and GDPR compliance. The other is this European cloud sovereignty, using someone who is based completely in Europe and doesn't just have one of their regions in Europe that potentially has data that kind of drifts and kind of maybe isn't completely in Europe. And then also the sustainable development side of this around green computing and things like that. So not all of those apply to every decision, but I'm curious as to what brought you to Scaleway.
Yeah, so I actually didn't know about this green part of it, but that sounds really interesting. So I'm really happy to hear that. That would be one plus. But the most important thing, especially for this cloud project, is that really the company is European, right? And it's not a US company, because there's this, I think there's been this data privacy shield, which no longer works for US companies. So it's really important for the security of the patient data, for the medical data, that we have a European company really hosting our data. And of course, the GPU credits that we got to train our models, that was, of course, also a good argument.
Credits are always good. Andreas?
Yeah, maybe to add, it's not just about, let's say, the data privacy laws. It's also about the trust of the customers. And of course, it's a different one. You have to provide these special sheets to their GDPR specialists. And if they see AWS or Google, it's not fun to establish something like that. So it's really about trust. And this is one reason why we also investigating this one here.
Just to circle back to the green piece, the reason that I brought up the green side of this is because, for example, the DC5 data center here in Paris and their new models as they roll these out doesn't even have air conditioning. It uses a very special system of evaporated water that cools the air of the data center without requiring air conditioning. And so it uses a ton less electricity, but also uses a lot less water, funny enough. Even though it's cooling by water, air conditioning uses more. And so the idea there is just super interesting, because it's actually obviously you need electricity to power a data center because the computers have to run on something, but you can have a much more sustainable approach to how that works. And that's one of the, apart from really being technologists, I think, at Scaleway and wanting to solve deep problems because they're very just brainy about getting into the engineering of this, they're also very focused on the sustainability. And I think that's a great thing to see that we can do. So Jurga, if you go on the website, I think there's a lot of stuff on DC5 and the sustainability of what they've built there. That's super interesting. But yeah, so that's always interesting to understand why people come. You mentioned the credits, which is always a great thing to have some free stuff. But at the end of the day, what is the real reason that you're in business with someone? And I think you touched on some good points about the kind of data sovereignty issues that matter, not just from a compliance point of view, but just from maybe a reputation perspective of we've built our business technically somewhere. So what's coming? What's in the pipeline is kind of my last question that I like to ask, just to kind of know. MD Brain is obviously your first product. I saw that there's a spinal product, I think, that's on the way. What's coming in the months and year ahead for Mediair?
Okay. We completely want to establish the brand of MRI AI products. So meaning we will not only have the brain, but also other regions. And as you maybe read in June, we provided the new tools also segmenting brain tumors and aneurysms. So focusing on different diseases for the brain. And we want to further establish other tumor burdens diseases like prostate cancer and other things we are investigating right now. But I can't tell you all of the ideas we have, but there will be definitely some other regions than the brain.
That's fantastic. It's always a tough question because you can only say so much, but it's super interesting to hear what you can talk about in the pipeline, and so that as you expand this great tool set to other diseases and other regions of the body, that's going to be cool to see. I wish you all the best as you guys move forward, building up Media Air. This has been really fun. I've learned a bunch, so I always appreciate that, and thank you both, Andreas and Jörg.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure meeting you and to talk to you.
Thank you for joining us as well for this episode of Startup Stories with Scaleway. If you are a startup that uses cloud computing resources, be sure to check out Scaleway's startup program at scaleway.com. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your preferred podcast platform, and check out all of the previous episodes of the podcast. Again, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.